a time when you get hurt. There's gonna come a time when you crawl in the dirt. There's gonna come a time when tears ain't enough. There's gonna come a time when life will treat you so rough. There's gonna come a time giving more than you get. There's gonna come a time you don't know about it yet. There's gonna come a time. There's gonna come a time.
Welcome to Chapel Spotlight. I'm Pastor John Farbach, and we're making episode 1 with the Moyer family, and we've entitled this The Moyers Pressing On. I'd just like to introduce everybody. We have Dina, all the way at the end, Zach, Eli, Alicia, and Doug. This story centers around a very serious car accident not too far from where the Moyers live, and we're going to tell that story because it's a story that will, I believe, inform but also encourage as we see how the Lord worked in their lives. I want to begin, Alicia, would you tell us about your family? How many children you have? I'd also be interested to know how many foster children and other children you adopted.
So my husband and I, we have 6 biological children and 7 children that we've adopted. We also have fostered, and the total number of children that we've had the opportunity to love on is 47.
47 children. Mm-hmm. Wow, amazing. Tell us, Doug, where do you live at?
We live in Oak Harbor, Ohio. Actually we live just outside out in the country.
Okay. And Doug, what is your profession?
I'm basically a self-employed contractor.
Okay, okay.
Whenever you're ready.
I'd like to welcome Captain Gary DeWitz from the Carroll Township Fire and Rescue Department. Captain, I'd really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And if you would, just give me an idea how long you've actually worked in the Fire and Rescue Department.
I've been a member of the fire department since about 2004. Started off as a basic firefighter with a 36-hour certification. Now I have my Fire 1, and I hold a position as captain on the department now.
Okay. We're going to talk about the accident now, and I'll move to this. The accident happened in Ottawa County, not too far from where you live. And Doug, I want to ask you, can you tell us the date and the time? Oh, Alicia should answer that. Okay.
It was January 10th at 11:45 at night.
Okay, and what year was that?
It was 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what was the weather like at that time?
It's cold. It was probably around 25 degrees.
Yeah, it was between 25 and like 28 degrees.
Okay.
But it was really windy too.
Okay. Dina, where were you, Eli and Zach, coming from just prior to the accident?
We were coming from our friend Dave Harrison's house. We had worked on his sprint car that night, and then we had gone over, they lived straight across the road from Dave was the Lores, and that was my fiance's house, and we were over there just hanging out, so we were just coming home from a night out.
And when you were driving back, approximately what time was that?
Probably like 11:15 when we left.
Okay. All right, so not real late. Driving back is when you evidently fell asleep, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and when that happened and impact was actually experienced on that tree, what was your immediate response? What was going on in the car?
Well, I don't remember hitting the tree. I don't remember the impact at all. I remember waking up and everything kind of just being blurry and a haze. Like I didn't really know what was going on. I just was like looking around and like I didn't know. Like I didn't know what had happened at that time.
Okay. Eli, what are your recollections from the impact? You were in the back seat. You said you were laying down, actually.
Yeah, I was in the back seat. I was laying down. I was asleep, and when I woke up, like you said, everything was a haze. Didn't really know what was going on, and then kind of realized that we did hit the tree, and just kind of moved on from there.
Tell us about what you did in getting out of the car and trying to make it home. Tell everybody exactly what happened.
So me and Dina were talking, and Dina told me that her door was stuck and she couldn't open it. And so at that point, we looked for the phone, and we found it, and it ended up being broken, so we couldn't call anybody. So my door was able to be opened, so I opened it. And prior to that is when all that went down is I knew my leg was broken, but I didn't know how bad. I knew that it was sitting beside me and I had to pick it up and move it, but I thought maybe I could get out and walk, or at least maybe crawl. So I grabbed the handlebar on the top and went to slide down and try to step out of the vehicle. Well, I slipped because my hand was bloody, and I hit the running board and slid out onto the ground and back into the water. And then I crawled up to Dina's door, and I stood up and pulled and knew it wasn't going to open, so I got back on the ground and kept crawling and got to the front of the car where I could see Zach, and stood back up. I tried to walk again, but being that my femur was snapped in half, when I went to put pressure on it, it hit and was in excruciating pain. So I laid back down and I crawled probably about 35 to 50 yards down the road, and then came to where I couldn't go anymore without crutches, or if I made it farther, no one could see me and they could possibly run over me. So I ended up just rolling over in the ditch and covering myself, trying to keep warm, being that it was 25 degrees out.
Okay. Zach, what do you recollect about that evening?
Well,
Nothing.
I remember leaving the house and driving a little bit down the road and falling asleep. Before I fell asleep, though, I laid my seat back. I was in the front seat, passenger. I laid my seat back, and I fell asleep. And I don't remember anything until a week later, waking up in the hospital.
Okay.
I think it's interesting to note that all three of them were asleep when the accident happened, and so none of them have a recollection of the impact, which is one of the things that a lot of times is really hard for people to get past, is that initial sound of the metal and everything like that. But
Yeah.
I feel like God had them all asleep. They were spared that part of it.
I will say though, once we had gotten home from the hospital and we were in our chairs in the one room sleeping just so that we were all together, I woke up from a dead sleep and I had a dream that I had pushed on the brake really fast, and I pushed on it with my broken leg, and that pain woke me up from that dream. So I don't know if that was a recollection of it actually happening or not, but it was very like like it had happened. Like I had moved my body to push on the brakes in my dream, and it was like I woke up screaming, and I looked over and Eli was still asleep. I was like, okay. Then
Doug, how long from the time of the accident until actually somebody made a call to the sheriff, 911, or the EMS to actually get there?
Right. Well, the accident happened about 11:45, and the sheriff or 911 was called at about 4:30.
Okay, so you're talking almost 5 hours.
Yeah. Yes.
In cold weather, and some serious things happen in cold weather. Who arrived first, the sheriff or the EMS? Anybody?
Sheriff.
Sheriff did, okay. When you received the call on January 10th, 2017, and it was at 4:30 in the morning, the Moyer accident where the car was almost embedded in the tree, what went through your mind when you got that call?
Same things that go through for every call is you're trying to get a image of the area that the accident's at, what's around, what resources you have, and then as you're driving in, listening to what kind of personnel you have to know if you're going to need additional departments to come help.
When you got to the scene, how long did it take to assess the exact nature of the accident?
Initial size up, we do what's called a 360 walk around. Those take usually about a minute, maybe a little over. That gives you an idea of how great the impact was, what level of injuries. So that helps you determine whether or not you're going to need life flight or, like I said, additional resources for extrications.
At what point did you retrieve the driver, Dina Moyer, from the car? Was that something that took a certain amount of expertise to get her out?
We had to do a little bit of extrication to get her out. We chose to get her out first to make ourselves more room. That didn't take too long. Guessing 10 minutes to get her opened up and out.
Now, was she immediately put into an ambulance and
She
sent to
was.
St. Vincent's?
She was immediately loaded into an ambulance. Due to the temperature outside, they don't try to do any real assessing outside. Once they're stable, they'll get them loaded up and they'll look at them in the warmth of a squad.
Okay. Now, Eli, who was actually off the side of the road in kind of a ditch, you had sent him on first, is that correct?
Correct. He got loaded into a squad because he was already out. They didn't have to wait. He did have pretty severe injuries himself. Amazed he actually made it that far.
Yeah, I in talking with him, I would agree that with a broken femur that he had, pretty incredible that he could get that far. When the helicopter arrives on the scene, as I understand it, there is a protocol that takes place with the doctor and the EMTs. Real quickly, could you just explain how that works?
So the life flight doctors and nurse, they'll get a size up as they're walking from their helicopter to the scene, whether that's from fire or EMS. Once they get on scene, they'll evaluate what they have and make recommendations. We've even had them start pushing drugs on a scene.
What did they tell you as they looked into your vehicle? Did they give you any words of direction or encouragement?
They were asking like how many people were in the accident and that the EMS was on the way and that just to stay calm and that they were there now, they were going to take care of it. I remember as soon as EMS got there or the fire department, they had opened my door and then I could hear more because I couldn't hear because our window was up and I couldn't put it down and the police officers couldn't even open the door themselves. They had to use the jaws of life and cut open it. And then I could hear them talking about what to do and who to contact. And I was like, listen, my parents are right down the road. The door is open. They're waiting for us to come home. Just walk in and, you know, that's our home right down there. So, but yeah, the police officers were the first ones there.
But didn't they also say there was only 2 people in the vehicle?
Yeah, they were like, yep, there's only 2 people. And I was like, no, there's 3. My brother is out there. He started crawling. They're like, no, honey, there's only 2 people. And I said, no, there is 3 of us. My brother is outside the vehicle. Please go find him. He's cold. I don't know where he is.
And how did they find him?
They did eventually start walking.
So, the sheriff passed me, and the first one passed me. I waved. He didn't see me. Then the second one that came up behind him, he saw my hand, and then he jumped out and came over and asked me if I was okay, and I said, I'm fine. A little beat up, but just go check on everybody else.
That's an unusual definition of fine. Half frozen, broken femur.
Comparatively, he was fine.
Okay. Alicia, when did you learn about the status of the kids? I mean, as soon as you probably heard the fire engines and rescue vehicles, you
Well-
probably were up.
Well, actually, we didn't hear anything. We were sound asleep, and all of a sudden we could hear a man's voice in our kitchen saying, "Mr. Moyer, Mr. Moyer," and Doug looked at me, and I looked at him. I said, "Who's in our house?" And so Doug stumbles. I remember he about fell out of bed because it's not very often you hear somebody screaming
Okay.
in your kitchen. And so he went out there, and he came back in, and he said, "The kids are in a bad accident." So I walked, he said, "It's just down the road." So I walked to our porch, and I looked outside, and I could see the spotlight on the accident. I could see all the flashing lights of the fire trucks. I could hear life flight landing. I remember standing there, and I could feel it was so cold. I kept thinking, "Oh my gosh, my babies are out there." And I just wanted to get there, but of course we had to get clothes on first and all these things because we were still asleep.
Yeah.
It was 4:30 in the morning, so we got down there within probably 5 minutes after the officer woke us up.
Yeah.
And at what point did you actually contact to call in a life flight helicopter?
They were called shortly after we got on scene due to the mechanism of injury, as well as we called in additional resources from Portage Fire out of Oak Harbor for additional manpower for the extrication.
Was very interesting that I learned from talking with you. Zach was pinned in there pretty seriously. In effect, metal was pressing on his leg almost like a tourniquet.
Yes.
And there's a fear that if they release the metal, that you could end up hemorrhaging.
Right.
Because he may have had injuries where he could bleed out.
Right.
And, tell me about the doctor, his assessment, the fireman. They were going to amputate both of Zach's legs. Is that correct?
Well, the extrication was taking an extremely long time. The 911 was dispatched around 4:30, and the extrication was going on and on. He wasn't extricated till about 7:30. So during that time, there was a lot of back and forth of how do they get him out, and what are they going to do? And so there was a line of firemen, and they were alongside the vehicle, and they would each take a turn on the jaws and all the machines they were using to try to cut the metal. And so one would have their turn, and then it's pretty physically demanding. So then the next one would go, and then the next one. And during that time, the life flight doctor and also an EMT were right by Zach. The EMT was in the vehicle holding Zach still and trying to talk with him because he had to support his neck and try to keep him from moving. And then the life flight doctor would take and keep assessing him, and he often was saying to the fire department and the EMS, "We have to get him out. If you can't get him out, we're going to have to amputate his legs to get him out." And
This was above the knee too.
Yeah, above
this
the
isn't
knee.
below. This is above the knee.
Yeah.
They would
And-
amputate.
And let's back up for a second. Dina and I are already gone. They had got her out, and we were en route to the hospital. So
and
we
Eli
were,
was there at the hospital.
yeah, Eli was already at the hospital.
Yeah.
We were en route when all this was going on.
And so there was this constant of the life flight doctor saying, "We need to get him out. We need to get him out. We need to amputate his legs." I'm calling the amputation team, and our fire department, EMS, they're local friends of ours, and they're just like, "No, we can get him out in one piece. Give us more time. Give us more time." And so there was this very fine line of how long they could wait to get him out, and how they were going to do that.
Now, as
So
I understand it, the attending flight doctor has the final say.
Yes.
That's the way the protocol is set up.
Yeah.
So had he decided, nope, we got to take it, that would have happened. Well, I'm sure you're thankful that
Yes.
those firemen were kind of pushing back a little bit. We can get him out, and they certainly did, which is just so thankful for that.
absolutely.
And I actually got the chance to talk to the life flight doctor at a function that we went to.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, "What was your deciding factor?" And he says, "My job is to make sure that patient gets out of the vehicle one way or another." He says, "I literally was going on a minute by minute assessment of what was going on." And he says, "Those guys were telling me they were going to get him out." He says, at one point, he probably said that I had less than 5 minutes to before he was going to call everything in, and then they ended up getting him out.
At some point, in talking with the Moyers, the doctor said that he would likely have to call an amputation team. And when you had heard that, what was the response of the EMT workers that were trying to get Zach out of the vehicle?
The fire personnel, when we heard that conversation, we kind of took it a little personal. We never sent just part of a person out of a car, and we weren't going to start then. We stepped up our efforts, and instead of one person work until they were tired, one person would do 1 or 2 cuts or spreads and hand off to the next guy. We just had a line of Carroll and Portage firefighters just going through and one guy directing.
The immediate medical care that was provided, Dina, you were taken, Eli was taken first, and then you were taken by ambulance. Do you remember getting to St. V's Hospital in Toledo and any of the attendants that cared for you there?
Yeah, I remember arriving, and I remember being in the waiting room, and I remember my dad being in there, and then I believe Steven showing up, and then Ashlyn showing up, and I remember them taking my vitals and everything, and then they started to take off my boots, my clothing, and then they gave me a shot of morphine or whatever it was, and I was very dazed and hazed, and I knew nothing what was going on. It was the weirdest feeling I'd ever felt, but it was like I was there, but I wasn't there, and that's when they put my shoulder back into place, and then they started to assess the rest of my body and see what was wrong.
Well, I remember I was living in Northwood at the time, and I remember getting down there. I think it was, if I recall right, about 7 o'clock, and I was outside, and 7:30 or whatever, when I heard the life flight coming in, and I knew Zach was on it because I was told that he would be there. When all of you were there, you were in the ER, and then that great picture that your mother sent, all 3 of you are in an intensive care room together. And Eli, you're on the right, you're on the left, Dina, Zach's in the middle, you're holding his hand. Tell us about that experience.
I remember I knew Zach was next to me, and Eli was on the front room with me, and I remember that Eli was up in a wheelchair, and they were asking if I wanted to go in and see Zach, and so they got me in a wheelchair, and then we all went over to there, and it was just like we were all in pain, and I knew that we were all hurting, but it was just so good to be next to them and know that they were there still.
I remember there were a number of the pastors from church being there, and there were a number of people. I believe Rick Bowling was there. I think Jamie Leonetti was there. Don't cry. You'll make me cry. What about the surgeries? How soon did surgeries begin, knowing all of you had injuries to some degree?
Right. Well, when we got to the emergency room, and they kind of briefed us on each of the kids, and it was sort of surreal to have 3 kids in 3 different rooms, and you walk in and there's clothing cut, and they're handing me their rings and jewelry and just all those things. And so if I remember right, the surgeries for Zach did not happen right away. They were just trying to stabilize him. They were doing a lot of testing. In fact, he was just seemed very much like it was a touch and go kind of thing for him. For Eli, they did not do your surgery. They did your surgery
his
right
was right
away.
away.
Mine was right as
Okay.
I came in.
Now, was it primarily setting the leg?
Yeah, so as soon as I came in, I saw you. I do remember that. And then Jill, which is our cousin, she was working that night there. They did everything. They did all my vitals and everything, and I went right into surgery.
Okay.
And then by the time I came to the next day, I already went through all my surgery and everything to get my leg, because there was a rod in my leg that set it back into place. But yeah, that was the day of, right after I got it there.
And then
What
yours
about-
was
Mine was the day or 2 days later, because they after I was all settled and they had put my arm back in, I had come to from the medicine. I was laying in my room and they said, "Hey, a doctor's gonna come in and we have to put a weight on your leg because we can't get you into surgery right now." And so it was very strange. A doctor, or actually, I don't know if it was a doctor, but anyways, he came in and he had just like a tool that my dad would use in the wood shop, and it was a drill, and he drilled a hole straight through my lower leg and put a rod through, and then hung a metal string off the end of my bed and put a weight on to separate my two bones from connecting, because they heal so fast that they didn't want them to heal crooked, and they wanted to wait till they could actually set it. So they hung that off my bed until the next day or the day after.
Okay. Long-term care. Do you want to just share what it's like dealing with three of your kids who have significant injuries? What was it like for you and Doug, Alicia, to have to attend to that? I mean, and you have a whole bunch of other kids. That's the other side of it.
Right. It was pretty intense for a while. The first few I don't know if it was days, weeks, however long it was. We were all at the hospital. So Doug was in one room. He was mostly with Eli, I believe. I was with Zach, and Steven was with Dina. And then once Dina and Eli got discharged, which took a few days because they had to have their surgeries and then they had to learn how to walk and that kind of thing, they actually were discharged and stayed one more night at like a hotel at the hospital. I stayed with Zach, and he, so I was I felt like I couldn't do much to help at home. Doug had to take the kids and go home. And so he did a lot of the first days of care. How was that?
It was different. I basically moved one of our rooms. I
Your
can't
room.
remember.
Your room.
Yeah, it was our room, wasn't it? I moved our room out into the living room, and then I had the chairs lined up in our room so they could sleep, because
Like
that's the only
boy,
way.
Lazy boy chair.
Yeah, they could sleep was in the lazy boys, and then literally every 2 hours I would administer medication. I would help Dina to the bathroom. Eli was fairly.
He just bounces back after.
He bounces back quick. The only thing I really had to help him with was shower, but it was literally every 2 hours. So I was getting very little sleep, and my ear was always open because, at that point you're just, what's going to happen, with them.
Sure.
With Zach, he had a pretty significant brain injury, a lot of swelling, a lot of bleeding, and things like that. So he was very vocal, not realizing he was, but he was in a lot of pain. So he did a lot of yelling and crying and hallucinating and things like that. So for the first probably 10 days at least, it was very intense in the hospital because his brain would start to swell, and then they would do more testing, and they would think, do we need to go in for surgery? And then they would discover there was another bone broken that they didn't know was broken, and then we'd go for surgery for that, and it would sort of start the cycle of the brain injury all over. And then he ended up being moved to a second hospital for a little bit of physical therapy, and then they actually wanted to move him to a nursing home because of the amount of care he would need when he would get home, like just with self-care and the brain injury, and then having 3 limbs broken and unusable. But we really fought to be able to just bring him home with our other kids, because we thought that would be the best way for him to heal. And instead of him being separated, our kids have grown up and they've always been really good friends and as well as brothers and sisters, but they just care an awful lot about each other, and to have him separate from everyone didn't seem like it would be the best. So we were blessed by our church family. They put an addition on the house and made a room for him. We brought a hospital bed home. He was transported home by ambulance, and then from there it was 24-hour care of just everything that he would need. So
I remember that a lot of people showed up and helped turn that
Front
porch into a bedroom for Zach.
yeah.
Let's talk about long-term issues. And I want to ask Dina first. When you recall this whole accident and the fact that you were the one behind the wheel, has has that been difficult for you to, I guess, deal with the fact that you look at Zach and Eli, and what has that been like for you?
At times it does. It does have an effect on me. I do feel responsible for not just saying, oh, I can't drive, or, let me get a little bit of sleep, let me pull over.
Yeah.
And I look at them and I do feel like sometimes it is my fault that, they're having a hard time sometimes. And but then I remember God's grace and just know that He has a plan for us, and that His will was going to be done no matter what. So even if it wasn't me behind the wheel, it could have been someone else, or it could have been them later in life. So I just pray that, His will would be done in all of this.
Eli, what about you? Have you had recurring issues because of your leg? I know you work construction. Are there times where you can tell that the weather's going to change because your leg is?
Yeah, yeah, most
Broken.
definitely. I mean, it does come into play a lot with what I do. I don't have the same emotion or range of motion in my leg. Like, I can't bend down. I can't put my knee to the ground, or I get sharp pain through my entire leg, and it cripples me for a little bit. But I get through it for the most part. I mean, my arm, since I re-injured my arm, that really put a setback on what I do, because swinging a hammer, a sledgehammer, and everything, I don't have the same strength that I did.
Okay.
But I mean, other than that, I mean, I did have problems sleeping for a long time, but I got that figured out. So now I'm just trying to get back to normal, the way I was.
Zach, you and I have kind of gotten close
Mhm.
because I knew quite early on that the doctors had said you may end up losing your leg.
Yes.
And I went through that same situation years earlier. Tell us about what you've had to deal with your leg. I know you had a good doctor in Ann Arbor, and tell us what it was like with you and your parents having to take you there and working with that doctor.
So my ankle was, destroyed in the accident. It was completely flipped around, and they didn't actually put my ankle together for a few days later. It took, I think, about a week or so for them to actually put my ankle back together, and that was a joy. Waking up screaming in pain while the doctors put my ankle back together, and I won't ever forget that doctor's face. Every time I go to the hospital, I know what doctor did it, and he was doing his job. But waking up in excruciating pain, feeling that and remembering that. But then from there on out, it was a lot of therapy to get to use it. I had no range of motion in my foot. It was a brick. It was one hard bone from my ankle down.
Yeah.
It
Did they fuse your leg together, or was it just
just fused together by itself because
okay.
everything was broken and there was no blood flow to the talus bone.
I remember, Alicia, I gave you an article that my doctor wrote at medical college. It was called Limb Salvage versus Amputation. And in that article, they actually rate what actually determines an amputation. And it was pretty clear, even your doctor in Ann Arbor was saying, you will have to have this amputated. What caused you and Doug and Zach to say now's the time?
I think it got to a point for Zach where he just had so many limitations by keeping that limb that he realized that he would be better off to have that gone. There was the pain, the inability to move it correctly. He wasn't able to run or jump, and just even walking was painful, sleeping was painful, and he took a lot of time to think about it and pray about it, and
And research it.
research it.
Yeah.
But he had said from early on after the accident, he had said, I know that I got to keep my legs at the accident, but I just feel like God's preparing me that I'm going to be okay when they have to take this
Yeah.
leg. So it was something that it took, 4 4 years,
4 years.
almost 5 years before it happened. But in that time, he came to a real peace about it, that it wasn't going to be. He was so thankful that he got to keep them initially, and then it was just time for it to go.
I want to talk a little bit about some spiritual lessons and blessings that were a result of this. We talked about the church doing some things to help, putting the room on and helping out with other things, food,
So many people helped with the kids. They
Yeah.
they took our little kids for days after the accident.
I'd be interested to know how you all feel, and I'm not going to ask every one of you. You can just kind of speak, whoever wants to. But when you have professionals from every phase, whether it's the sheriff, the EMTs, the life flight, the emergency room doctors, the surgeons, what's your perspective after having gone through all this about the professionalism that it takes to bring a serious situation to basically a pretty good result?
Yeah. Well, I know when the accident happened, and we finally got to the scene, I stood there for a minute and I could feel the wind hitting me, and I could see Dina in the car. She was mouthing, "I'm sorry." I didn't know where Eli was. They told me he had already been taken. They told me they didn't want me to go where Zach was because they wanted me to go sit in the ambulance. So I knew that it was pretty serious. And I remember very plainly saying, even if my babies are not coming home, I still trust you. I know that you are in charge of this. And I remember praying for each person that was working for my kids, because I knew they had a tough job. I didn't even realize at that moment how tough it was going to be. That it was going to be hours yet before Zach got out. It was going to be hours before I got to see Eli again. It was going to be, I would hear Dina as they took her out of the car. I would hear this cry. I will never forget how awful and gut-wrenching it was to hear her scream when they moved her leg. And so, there was so many people that day that God used. He used the firemen and the EMTs and, life flight and nurses, doctors, surgeons, everyone to fix up the kids. We had Zach with 3 limbs that were unusable, and then Eli had the broken leg, re-injured the arm. He had a pretty decent head injury, face was broken. Dina, she had the dislocation of the shoulder and then the leg, and then her spleen was damaged. All these things, and in the ER they're telling us all these things. This is broken, that's broken, this and that, and it just made our heads spin. And so we were just so grateful.
I know that it was fairly cold that night. It wasn't extreme cold, but it's cold enough if you've been in a car for nearly 5 hours. What was the chance of hypothermia?
Once you're compounding the cold with an injury, it gets elevated really quick. No heat because the car's not running. It was cold.
Was there concern for that? I mean, we got to get these kids out of this vehicle.
There's always a concern to get them out of the vehicle. The cold doesn't weigh into it as much as the injuries.
Okay. I know I talked with you on the phone, Captain, but what if that tree had not been there?
In my opinion, if the tree wouldn't have been there, I think the tree saved their life, because they would have went into that pond that was pretty much frozen over, wouldn't have supported a car, and they'd have just disappeared, and nobody would have noticed.
Yeah, I know Doug Moyer said that pond right around there was 4 to 5 foot. I mean, if that had flipped and rolled over, that would have been a very, very serious situation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, even 5 foot of water, that would put the water, I mean, maybe they would have their heads sticking out, but
The cold would have been just
when being cold, the windows are all up, they're not going to be able to open the doors.
Now, you've worked at this rescue operation for quite some time, and I imagine there has to be some sense of jubilation when you get people out alive, and then now it's been 5 years, and you look at the success of their recovery. I mean, how does that make the department feel that we really did a good job, men.
It feels good. We get maybe 5% of the people will come back and let us know how they made out, thank us for getting them out of the car, and that's really what makes this job worth doing. I mean, nobody gets into the fire and EMS service for the big money.
Yeah, yeah.
We're all volunteers, and we do this because we want to help our community.
Well, Captain, I really appreciate you taking this time on a Saturday day off to come in and answer some of these questions and help us put together this documentary of the Moyer accident. And from our hearts, we just want to thank you and the thousands of people who volunteer to serve their communities and helping them in situations just like the accident with the Moyers. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and I thank you for taking the time to put this all together.
You know, in God's providence, we as Bible-believing Christians believe that God superintends all details. That's what providence really is. But that tree, that tree that you hit was the only tree on that pond on the road. And Doug, you told me that that pond is 4 to 5 feet pretty quick.
Yeah.
Had that tree not been there, chances are you would have rolled and been underwater, cold water. Could have been a very different outcome.
Oh, yeah.
Could have been 3 dead children.
Yes.
Tell me your thoughts on that, Doug.
Well, and not only just the tree being there, but the impact that the tree took. I mean, I was on the fire department for many years, and I've seen cars hit trees and completely take the tree out. And there's no reason that tree shouldn't have done the same thing. I mean, it's not like it's a mighty oak or anything like that. And so it's by the grace of God that they hit the tree, and that, you know, God's sovereignty that the tree was planted there at that time. That's the only way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
And the
amazing.
trees become sort of symbolic to us, because kind of when you look at the tree, you see the scar, but the tree is still alive and it still blooms every year and it's still standing. And I think that for our family, and especially for our kids, they're changed. They have something different because of this accident.
Yeah.
But God's still using them, and He still will use them, and they're still here, which is a miracle in itself. When we hear the stories of everyone who was on scene that day and people who treated them at the hospital, we have been told so many times, your kids shouldn't be here, and we say, but by the grace of God, they are.
It was the perfect temperature that night. If it was a few degrees higher, we would have bled out. If it was a few degrees lower, we would have had hypothermia. It was like a 6-degree difference. It could have been, and we could have died either way.
Well, we're glad that you did it.
Amen.
And we're thankful for you. Any scriptures that come to mind that were particularly encouraging to you as you went through this adversity?
I remember reading my Bible sometime after the accident and coming upon this verse of Psalms 94:17, and I actually got a tattoo of it on my back because of how impactful it was to my life when I had read it. And it said, it says, unless the Lord had given me help, I would soon have dealt in the silence of death. When I said my foot is slipping, your unfailing love, Lord, supported me. When anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought joy to me. And I just think that as I sat there waiting for somebody to come down that road that night, for something to happen, I just kept praying and holding Zach's hand because I knew, Lord, you have to bring somebody. Please save us. And I remember shouting to Eli and praying for him to make sure that he would be okay through this all. And this verse just spoke it all to me when I had read it soon after the accident had happened.
The Bible speaks of the pearl of great price. You don't cast those before swine. You have basically acquired pearls of great price. Not many people have gone through this and have come out with faith and confidence. And I know this, God will want you, all of you, to use this experience, because you will come across other people who will go through the same type of adversity, And it's something to thank God for, even though the time is rough when you're going through it. It causes perseverance in your life. And I'm very proud to say that I know the Moyers. Very proud to say that Zach, you and I have cultivated a little relationship. On a little bit of a lighter note, the day before the amputation, I came over and Doug was at the table, and I kind of jokingly said, hey, you know, when you get your amputation, maybe we can get a tattoo together and we'll call ourselves the Stump Brothers. And I remember you laughing about that. Well, I was joking. Well, he didn't take it as a joke, and he reminded his dad that Pastor John said that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm the last person to ever get a tattoo, but if we do it, I'll do it because you're my Stump Brother. Thanks so much for being a part of this first episode of Spotlight.